Hello and welcome back to RamsTalkPodcast, the preview show. We're looking forward to this Wednesday's game against Swansea at home, back under the Pride Park lights. We are recording a little bit early, so Derby haven't played Preston as of yet. So please, I guess, forgive me for being a little bit more optimistic. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Obviously, Swansea have also got a game to play as well tomorrow, but I'm joined by Luke from Swans Cast. Luke gave us the insight into Jerry Yates a bit earlier in the season, so you might recognise him. How are you doing, Luke?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on again. And yeah, you mentioned Jerry Yates there. Was my insight okay? Like, how's it panned out so far?
I think you got it bang on. I think a lot of fans are happy. We've got onto Jerry Yates sooner than I thought we would, to be honest, Luke. But no, let's talk about him.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think he's done well. It's very, very difficult to be a lone striker in this Derby County team, and he's cut an isolated figure at points this season. But I think we're seeing the best of him, and obviously, like I say, we've got Preston tomorrow at time of recording, and hopefully he can play well again and potentially get on the score sheet again. But of course, he's ineligible to play against his parent club. So, a little bit worried about our plan B when it comes to Wednesday night. But I mean, it leads me on to looking, I guess, at the first thing when I look at Swansea in the table. I see that you're the lowest scorers in the division. Yeah. You've obviously loaned out Jerry Yates. No one in your team scored above 2 goals. I guess it doesn't really cause too many issues because you are mid-table. You're not kind of, I suppose, hovering around that relegation zone. But as we know, a couple of losses in a row and you do get pulled back in. How much of a concern has that been this season, Luke?
Well, you mentioned obviously being mid-table, so it's not that much of an issue, but arguably maybe we'd be more near the playoffs or in them had we had a goal scorer, I guess, more in line with the teams in that area, which I know is a bit of a luxury and you're not entitled to having that, but I think we've probably got below a goal scorer at the moment. If you look at our actual goal scoring record in the league, even amongst the team, we're just not scoring goals. Not all the strikers' fault, to be fair. It's largely the chance creation as well. You're speaking about loaning Yates from us as well. I don't know whether there's going to be a conversation about that in January. I don't actually know the ins and outs of the loan deal, whether that's something that can happen for him to be recalled. And there's not been anything from the club to say any inkling that that's going to happen. I think it's just fans seeing that he's actually perhaps having a better time at Derby than what he had at the last half of the season with us. And look at our situation and put 2 and 2 together and like, why don't we just recall him? We've already got a striker. We don't need to buy one. Do you know what I mean? That sort of thing. Whether that happens, I don't know. But it's a bit of a worry. I think we do need to address it. I think it is definitely holding us back. We just need it to not hold us back to the point where we're in trouble, I think. But I think we'll be okay. I think we've got over most of our concerns. I don't think we're going to start knocking the goals in, but I think we've got enough to kind of keep us probably around where we are, I would say.
Yeah. And I guess looking at your recent fixtures, you play Leeds tomorrow, again at time of recording. That's going to be a tricky one, but I guess going back on some of the previous results, obviously 0-0 against Sheffield Wednesday, a loss against Millwall, a 2-1 victory against Oxford, a 1-0 victory against Watford. It's safe to say, I guess, that it's been a bit of a mixed bag. What do you think of those performances over the last 5?
The last 5 that you just mentioned actually are not too bad. Sheffield Wednesday aside, I think that was a bit of a dull game, 0-0. But it's an away point. I think you can never question an away point. The other 4, you didn't mention the last game, which was a 1-0 defeat to Burnley. Millwall smash and grabbed us, basically, right at the end of the game. A little bit of an error with our distribution from the goalkeeper cost us ultimately. But you've mentioned the striker problems. That's a game we should have won. Had we been able to score, I think we were pretty much the dominant team there. Just couldn't make it happen for whatever reason. And, Millwall got one. And I think they've been doing that to a lot of teams actually recently. They just beat Leeds as well, didn't they? So that was a frustrating one for sure. Oxford, I think going away, bearing in mind the context of that result, we hadn't won in quite some time. we hadn't actually scored a goal in about 9 hours, I think, before scoring 2 at Oxford. So that was a massive relief, and I think that did definitely take a lot of pressure off the first goal, at least, the team, and they've been playing better generally since. I think it's definitely fair to say, which was backed up by beating Watford, who are high flying actually in the league at the moment. They won the previous game to this, I believe it was 5-0. They beat someone off 6-0. So we went into that game kind of a little bit worried, but we've been quite good defensively actually this season, and it continued there. And we managed to get a win, and we were really good value for it. Again, 1-0 probably doesn't do us justice for the chance. Like, we should have scored more again, but we just can't at the moment for whatever reason. And Burnley away, yeah, we shouldn't have lost that game. The least said about the penalty decision that cost us a point there, the better. I think a point would have been fair. We had our chances to win. Goal line clearance not so long before the penalty was given from Burnley, so we would have been 1-0 up. Probably would have been not fortunate, but like they could have been aggrieved to not draw had we won. But we are definitely aggrieved to lose the game, especially in the manner that decision was given right at the end as well, like a 91st minute or something, a stupid handball in the box that, if they change the rule every other year, don't they, how it's worded about handball, and it's like half the time it's not, now it currently is by letter of the law. But it's one of them ones that I think as a football fan, it just should frustrate you, because that's not the sort of penalty decision you really should want to see in the game, I think, personally anyway. But ultimately, Burnley are a strong team, and I think that was a good performance for us. So the results don't all tell the picture of where we are, but I think they do definitely show why we are where we are in the league, and I think that probably will continue going into the rest of the season.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that Burnley game, and it's a sucker punch in the last moment. I think it was 90+4 according to FootMob. And you look at that and you think if that's a draw, then your last three are really good results. But I mean, it seems as though in terms of I've said it before, in terms of down the top end, you're not scoring goals, but you aren't conceding goals either. So you've conceded less than Sunderland and a few other teams that are above you. So what's been the secret at the back? I know you've got a player that I'm very, very keen on, Harry Darling. How has he kind of led the line at the back there? Is he a pivotal player at the back for you?
Yeah, no, he's definitely key. He's I think he's matured probably more than anything in this season to be just very consistent, very secure. He's had a tendency in the past where, look, he can do a bit of that wind-up merchant part of the game, if you like, sometimes, especially against certain oppositions. And look, you love to see that sort of thing, but I think sometimes it's a little bit too much where you're just risking that booking that a little bit too often in a bit of a silly way. And I think he's reined that in a bit, and he just looks ever more experienced, ever more assured, reliable, a bit of a leader figure at the back, and he's still quite young. So all those things coming through now, I think, is a really good asset for us. And he's partnered with Ben Cabango, and I think all season those two have been together in the centre-back positions. Barring injuries, they'll continue to do so, hopefully. And I just think it's a very strong pairing. They work well together. They understand each other. I think it's really important to have that good relationship in the centre-back to get a good, solid defensive foundation. And they've also linked up really well with our new goalkeeper as well. So that's obviously helped also. So yeah, I think really important. I think it's probably an argument to say the pairing of them has got to be near the top end of the league. Now, I was quite harsh on our defence for much of the earlier season. Now, not because of their performances individually, but I was saying personally, and I think the XG at the beginning of the year did back this up, or the XG against. I thought it wasn't quite showing the full picture, the low amount of goals we conceded. Based on the chances we were conceding, I think a lot of it was we're getting a bit lucky sometimes that teams weren't as clinical as they should be. However, I think ultimately you need a bit of luck sometimes to get confidence. And with those results, that good defence at the early part of the season, that I credited the team as having a good scatter defence, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on them backs up against the wall. We would lose the ball because we're a high possession team. Yeah, we keep the ball a lot of the time. which probably is another part of why our defence is so good, because we have more of the ball, ultimately, quite a lot more. So we don't have to defend as much. But when we were losing the ball, it's always on the transition. And because it's on the transition, the opportunities for the opposition tend to be better because we're out of shape. And we were quite good at what I called a scatter defence, where we running back into shape whilst the other team's counter-attacking. And we were doing quite well at kind of doing enough to snuff that out. And there's an abundance of chances you could probably pick out from the earlier games this season that the opposition should have done better with. But they didn't. And I think over time, that's just built their confidence, the goalkeeper as well, and the other parts of the team, like the midfield pairing, that's also contributing there as well. They've got a good relationship too. And I think, yeah, they've just become very rigid and secure over the last few games. And I'm a lot less concerned that it's a misleading stat now, and I think that it is a little bit more legit in terms of our defence being quite good. So from what I've watched, I think the Watford and the Burnley game, as much as we still lost 1-0 to Burnley, on paper, I think you take a 1-0 defeat away to Burnley, most teams in this league probably wouldn't. You obviously don't want to lose the games, but it's probably not considered a bad result at the same time. And we haven't lost a game this season by more than one goal. So I do think, yeah, it's time for me to give them the credit that they deserve, and hopefully that continues.
Yeah, I mean that's apparent in terms of looking at the fixtures. You don't give much away, you don't score much up the other end, and if you can, go into January and find a striker, or if your striker, your current number 9, can start finding the back of the net and continuing to keep finding the back of the net, then the only way is up, really. Let's talk about the top end of the pitch then. Who's going to cause Derby the most problems on Wednesday night, in your opinion? Who's the one to watch?
I can't quite tell you exactly who's going to start. It will either be Liam Cullen or Vipotnik up front. What I would say is they're not necessarily the ones going to cause all the problems, by the way, but they'll be the one leading the line. And what I would say is Liam Cullen, I personally want him to start or at least the next match. Obviously, I know we're missing a match out before this actually happens. That hasn't happened yet. He's just come off the back of an incredible performance for Wales, and I'm hoping that he can take that confidence through into the Swans, because if he can, and maybe something can click there. Maybe he could be the solution to our issues. Just for context, obviously it was Nations League. We got promotion. We needed to win the match by a certain amount of goals, basically, and we got lucky in the fact that the other teams lost that we needed to lose. But we won 4-0. He scored 2 and he assisted the other 2. So can't ask for more. It was the first 2 Welsh goals as well. So I'm hoping that he can take that the high that he's going to get from that, bring it back now to the season, and we can perhaps look a bit more threatening up top. If you're looking at who's actually going to cause the threat, tends to be from our wide areas, where there's the wing backs pushing on and being dangerous from the wide areas. So Josh Key and Josh Tymon, the right and left. Key tends to come. It's quite difficult one to pinpoint. He plays quite a fluid formation, but he quite often asks Josh Key from the right to play as a winger, but also come inside, and he quite often ends up in midfield or as an inside winger, which will allow the other winger, than the actual right winger, Ronald, which will either be Ronald or he might play on the left. Does interchange sometimes, depends who starts with him. To kind of have more space to operate in, and because he's a dangerous Brazilian winger, got a bit of pace about him, but he operates better when there's space in front of him, ultimately. So if Josh Key can come in from the right, distract some of the defence, get Ronald isolated 1v1 versus his marker, then he'll be the one we're looking to cause a bit of damage up front. In the wide areas, he's not really got the best goal scoring record. He's not that clinical in front of goals, but he's the one that can get us into dangerous positions and maybe win free kicks. He's a bit tricky. He's a bit quick. So he's just a bit of a dangerous player in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess looking at other players in your ranks, one that obviously stands out, and we've talked about a wind-up merchant previously in Harry Darling, but another one, in my opinion, is Joe Allen. And I think back to a time when he was playing for Stoke, and I forget the Derby County player. I think it might have been Bradley Johnson. I think they ended up having some form of altercation that looked more like a kiss, in all honesty, and I think got them both in a bit of hot water. But how's he been doing this season for you?
Look, Joe Allen, he's a Swansea boy. That's why we brought him back. He came through our academy back in the day, and it's kind of like he's going to end his career here now. He's at that stage of his career where he's just playing out his last few games and last days, but he's still valuable. When he does get on the pitch, he started a few games recently. He doesn't start every match. He's quite often starting when it's a 3-game week. So, considering we're playing you in the midweek fixture, I would argue there's a chance that he does start this game. In a centre midfield 3, probably one of the ones that's pushing on a bit. I would probably say he will start based on the last couple of match weeks that have been the same sort of 3 in a week. But yeah, he's just like an experienced player that calms things down. You're going to get out of him. You are right. He does like to get stuck in and wind up, and he's passionate, let's say. And there's been a few instances over the last few seasons since he's returned what we can highlight. Similar things, or an early yellow card, he'll come off the bench in the 60-odd minute and get a card by the 70th. That happens quite often, but I think it's because he knows what he needs to do to kind of stop his authority on a match, and maybe he's coming on at a time that control isn't quite where it needs to be, and he's making himself known. But yeah, he's definitely going to be a Swansea legend, I think, when he does hang up his boots for everything he's done. So I don't think anyone really give him a bad word. As much as he's not the same player as he was years and years ago, he's still going to get a good performance out of Joe Allen, like a 6, 7 out of 10 on a weekly basis. So yeah, hopefully he has a good game then if he does start against you guys on Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever day it is that we're playing.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing we'll tell our players not to get wound up and do a Bradley Johnson and have a bit of head loss. Yeah, I might be putting Bradley Johnson's name in there, and it actually wasn't Bradley Johnson, but he's the guy that's springing to mind in that previous game. Obviously, about Derby because I guess as a Championship fan, about Jerry Yates. And potentially about some of our other players. Is there anyone that you think can cause you problems that's in our ranks?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got a couple of ex-Cardiff City players in your ranks at the moment, don't you? Especially in forward areas. So I'd be a little bit concerned just for reasons of not necessarily because they're the player I'm worried about specifically, but because of their ties with Cardiff. I'm trying to think, the players' names escaped my mind. Winger, Mendes-Lang, is it?
Mendes-Lang, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I was watching a little bit of, I think it's your last game, the one where Yates scored the overhead kick, and did he hit the bar from halfway line or something, or nearly scored as well. And I think he was quite involved, Mendes-Lang, in some of the goals, or maybe from the corner, was he the one taking the corners? So there's a little bit of history with him. I think he played against Swans when they were in the Premier League, maybe. So yeah, I do wonder whether an old name like that might come back to haunt us. But maybe you'll tell me a little bit more of who's performing in regards to those. Obviously, you've got Curtis Nelson. He's another one as well, isn't he? I don't know if is there someone else there. I want to say you might have another.
Yeah, Ebu Adams as well in the midfield. Who's he's on. I think he's on however many bookings he needs. He needs one more, so you might not see him. I'm not sure if he gets a booking. I think whenever he steps on a pitch, so he might be missing, which would be a big miss. But yeah, it's interesting because if we're talking before we came on air, and I'm about to chat to you on your podcast as well, and you'll probably ask me more about who's gonna cause you problems, and it would be Jerry Yates, I think, off the back of the last performance where, like you said there, an amazing overhead kick and almost scoring from the halfway line. It was quite ironic that Wayne Rooney was in the opposition dugout and he almost scored 2 of Rooney's best ever goals. That's what it felt like watching on from that game. But yeah, I do know what you mean. I think when a player plays against a former rival, they tend to feed off the crowd, and maybe some will go inside themselves and kind of shirk away from it. But that's when really you need certain players to kind of use it in the right way. And if we can get a beat out of Mendes-Lang, who I think at times this season's come under a little bit of stick, it's difficult making the step up from League One where you're assisting and scoring every week to the Championship. And I think he has struggled a little bit, but maybe Wednesday could be the change that he needs, because we definitely need him performing. He's our captain, he's our talisman. So
is he captain? Surprised.
He is, yeah. So Paul Warne basically didn't come out at the start of the season and say who was captain, and he's just had it on his arm essentially. So I think they've not made a big.
I mean, he did never seem like that sort of player. I think, but to be fair, I'm biased being a Swansea fan, and he's an ex-Cardiff. And I think the way that he left Cardiff was a little bit controversial, with some stuff going on behind the scenes and off the pitch. So I'm just making assumptions based on what I know around that, I guess. So it's probably not fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably played his best football at Derby, in my opinion, and I think he's found a home at Derby. He had an amazing season last season, and like I say, he hasn't really hit the heights this season, but he is, over 30. When you're an explosive winger with legs, those are going to slow down at some point. So he has to.
We found that out last year when we got Yannick Bolasie on in a 1 month Christmas period trial thing that just didn't work. Let's just say he had one explosive moment on his debut, and he's like, "Oh my god, we've signed! He's a gem!" Like look at him, he's back to his old self. 5 minutes later, he's out of his puff, and just didn't do anything in any of the other games that he was on the pitch for, and didn't get kept after the 1 month was up. Funnily enough, but
I think there's definitely a lifespan for players like that, because if you do lose that yard of pace, I mean, unless you can develop your game, as some players have done previously, but majority of players can't seem to do it, and that's when they find themselves kind of dropping down the leagues, I guess. But yeah, I think we're due a good performance from Mendez-Laing, and hopefully, we see it against Preston, and hopefully he can follow it up in the midweek game against you as well. In terms, I guess we've talked about defensively. I'm just thinking, how did Derby win this game? Obviously, we've been touted as the set piece specialist, because we tend to score all of our goals from set pieces. So I wanted to ask about that. But is there anything else that you think is potentially a weakness that Derby could exploit on Wednesday?
I think set pieces are probably an area you could exploit. I don't think we've been horrendous at them this season, but historically, Swansea are not great at set pieces, especially when we play a possession brand of football. Hopefully that doesn't come back, but it hasn't been that bad this year, so I'm hoping that it's not something you can exploit, but you could definitely. I think a large part of why it's not been that bad actually this year is because our goalkeeper's quite strong at claiming corners and stuff like that. He's quite tall and he's very good in the air with his hands, so that's helped. I guess it takes some of the pressure off anyone else's heading ability. I think we would look to have the ball even away from home. We're going to look to dominate the ball. I think if you sit deep and frustrate us, and then conserve your energy for the opportunities you get on the break, like knowing when to press at the right times, if you get me, not necessarily all the time, because we pass the ball to move it around. We want to play through that to an extent. So if you're going to do a high press, it needs to be all together. And we can be caught out by that, don't get me wrong, and that can create chances. But I think if that doesn't work early in the game, that can be to detriment of energy levels then, can't it, as well? Or if we play through it, can create gaps. But I think if we've got the ball and you're sensible about when you all press together and win the back in those ways, as I said earlier on, quite often the chances that we do concede then are on transition. And it's about how good you are and how clinical you are in the counter-attack then to create a chance, which is maybe a goal-scoring opportunity or not. But that's been our undoing for quite some time, I think. Even go back to when Russell Martin was our manager, and now Luke Williams coming in, even with Michael Duff in between, just take that period out of it. But with these two managers, playing that sort of passing football, that is definitely something that has been a weakness through all of it, is just losing the ball in areas we shouldn't, and then trying to get back into shape. And during that period is where the opportunity is. And I think you can just get a highlights reel of goals that we conceded because of that, ultimately. And it's not as much this season, of course, as we've already discussed it, but that is where, if you're clinical enough and you're sensible about what you're doing, the chances can definitely be found.
And what are the aspirations for this Swansea team then? And what are the expectations in the fan base for the rest of the season? We talked about off air about a potential takeover, which is ongoing behind the scenes. But what's the aims on the pitch, Luke?
I think the aims this season on the pitch, realistically, right, were to have a better season than last season. Last season was a roller coaster, and we still had a respectable finish in mid-table at the end of it. So off the top of my head, it's either 14th or 12th. I can't quite remember. I'm not going to lie. It's one of those two. But ultimately, I think that's the minimum point, and we need to progress from that. That's the goal this season. We're on course to do it at the moment. I would argue and this is where it's also frustrating. I guess that's the expectation. That's the realistic expectation. So we're achieving that. We have been achieving it really all season. We haven't really dipped below. We've dipped slightly below during our period where we didn't score a goal for 9 hours. And as soon as we got a win, we went back up to where perhaps we were beforehand. However, seeing what we've seen so far this season, now the goal scoring is the main concern. Had that not been there, we could have been well overachieving from that expectation. And I think when you know how close that has been, and it's frustrating in the games that we've not necessarily won, or perhaps lost that we shouldn't have lost, based on the fact that we didn't score when we really should have, we probably could have been several positions higher, even looking at playoffs at the moment. And I'm not trying to just, every team wants themselves to do well and wants to, big themselves up, I guess. But we talked about the Burnley game, like we've played quite a few of the big teams now, and away from home, we played West Brom, we've played Watford. We'll see how we go on against Leeds now this weekend. But we haven't been blown away by anyone. And there's been periods where we've been on top of most of them in the games, and we just cannot score a goal. We cannot take advantage of those dominant spells. And some of the games like against Bristol City, against Stoke, the ones that aren't at the top end, where we've been dominant for 70, 80% of the game and still not come away with those results, just because we couldn't take those chances or create enough of those chances. That's why it's so frustrating that we are where we are, even though we're kind of achieving what we expected to achieve. So it's one of those things where it's like so near yet so far, but at least we know what the problem is, which is goal scoring and chance creation. And I guess it does take a little bit of time and maybe a couple of transfer windows to get the right players in to fix those problems. So yeah, I guess the good thing is we know it's a work in progress. You can see that progress and how to get there.
Well, if you could keep your hands off Jerry Yates in January, it'd be much appreciated. Hopefully he doesn't go on and score hat-tricks in every game until Christmas Day. But yeah, I mean, if he's attempting what he's attempting with his overhead kicks and chances from the halfway line, who knows what's going to happen over the next 5 or 10 games.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether he'll come back. I don't know whether he'd want to come back anyway. I don't think he had the best year when he was at Swansea, but it was, as I said, it was a roller coaster of a year, and I just think he was one of the collateral damage from that. I think unfortunate for him, because I think he was he couldn't really show what he had to do, and I do think he's a confidence player, and I think when he got stuck in that spiral downwards, you could never get back out of it. And the manager that brought him in got sacked, and he barely scored a goal after that. But ultimately, he scored, I think it was 7 goals by November. So that's not really a bad return in terms of Michael Duff's time at the club. And he's the manager that brought him in. So I do think sometimes he's remembered a bit harshly for his performances last season. As much as his performances went downhill, and there was a lot of frustrations at times. I think sometimes, there's a low cross into the box and he's inches away and you're just like, why didn't you throw yourself at it? But I think that's the confidence not being quite where it needed to be. So the fact he's trying overhead kicks now says to me that maybe he's in a bit of a better place and happier with his football. So that's good to see.
Yeah, this preview show has turned into the Jerry Yates review show, which I absolutely love. My last question for you, Luke, is what's your prediction for the game on Wednesday? What's your score prediction?
Definitely not going to be a big scoring game because I don't think any of our games are. It's difficult, isn't it, to see how everyone's going to respond from the international break. So I'll go out and say we're going away. I wouldn't really put it past maybe like a 1-1 draw or something like that. I said we're maybe better than we were with our goal scoring. I don't quite think we're fixed, if you like. So yeah, 1-1. I think that would be we'll say we're going against Leeds before I can say if it's a good or bad result. But yeah, 1-1 I'm going to go for.
Yeah, well, all the best against Leeds. Obviously, that is a tough game. Derby fans will be happy that that's your game before coming to
playing Sunday
Pride
as well,
Park.
so you've got an extra day.
Extra day's rest. Well, the way that Paul Warne works us in training, I don't think any of them rest. To be quite honest, I think they're always moving. But no, that's it's all set up to be a really interesting game on Wednesday, and we're looking forward to having Swansea at Pride Park. And like I said at the top of the show, having a winter game under the lights is always a good one. Thanks so much, Luke, for joining us and giving us a lowdown on the Swans. If you have enjoyed this episode, please go and vote for us, not vote for us, like us, give us 5 stars on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll be back, obviously, on Sunday for our review show to talk about this fixture and all the fallout from the last week. But yeah, if you have enjoyed, like I said, go and like us wherever you get your podcast from. Thanks so much. Cheers, Luke.
Thank you. Thanks.